So you like hearing horror stories? Well, here's some good real estate horror stories, just going over bad experiences with clients, real estate agents, or whatever in general. This is number 5, so if you want to hear more of this stuff, I've got 4 more episodes before this in this playlist, so feel free to watch those. If you do enjoy this content, like and subscribe is super useful. The goal is that you just see all of the crazy stuff that can happen when you're trying to buy a house and some of the things you should be aware of. But other than that, thanks for watching. Let's just jump right on into it, huh? So, story number 1, and this one is an agent story. Jake plus 5 zeros posted 3 years ago on the Reddits. I'm a newer agent. First showing, and I was turning the lights off and such while the clients were out front and decided to take a quick number 2. One, little ballsy taking a poop at a house just because you always got to be careful. If you're peeing, there's just less risk on when you're pooping. There's more risk on if something's going to happen. It's going to be a real problem because nobody wants poop just sitting in somebody's toilet. Doesn't really matter. Homes have bathrooms. Bathrooms are meant to be used as restrooms. And so it's a weird debate for real estate agents saying if it's appropriate or not appropriate. I can tell you a good chunk of people don't care at all, but it's always good to understand that it could be a problem. That's all I got on that. I hear footsteps on the roof, and and the next thing I know, the buyer is staring at me through the skylight. True story. I've since showed them 30 houses. They finally made an offer, and it was 100K below asking price at 250. Two crappy stories in one. So that tactic of offering like 100K less or like 50% of a home's value is a super valid tactic. It wouldn't be such a valid tactic, but it works. And people make a lot of money off of it. What a lot of first time home buyers don't understand though is that it takes like 100 offers to get one under contract at a price like that. And so me as an investor, I'm like, cool, if I can get this at this price, this is great. I can make a bunch of money off this. But if I don't get it, I don't really care. It barely wasted any of my time writing this offer. But for somebody that wants the house, it's just different. So make sure you understand that it's a numbers game if you're offering that low, and even still, might even 2 or 300 offers. But that's story number 1. Let's go. All right, this is story number 2. This is like literally the whole reason I made this horror story video is because I saw this and I was like, okay, it's time for me to add new number 5. But Horror Regret 1990 was posted literally like 2 days ago. My Brooklyn real estate horror story. I created a throwaway account for this because I don't want to be identified, but I just really needed to vent. I know the feeling. I'm like most people who assume buying an apartment in New York was the ultimate goal which needed to be achieved at all cost. However, it turned out to be a demoralizing experience. I first saw my apartment in Williamsburg, Brooklyn in late 2020, and shortly after decided to submit an offer given that it matched my criteria. One bed condo, close to the L train, new construction, low monthly common charges, fair price, not 600K. I was even able to lock a stellar mortgage rate of 3%. Good. However, even during the purchase process, things were not running very smoothly. As a first time homebuyer, I didn't have a ton of experience, but my intuition was telling me it was crazy for the closing process to take almost 100 days. Wow, that is a long time. My quickest closing was 14 days, but most of them take between 21 and 40. Anytime you go above 40, there's typically a very specific reason of that, which I think we'll learn more about. This was because the HOA of the building wasn't responsive and took forever to submit the insurance documentation to my lender in order to approve the loan. Everybody acts like HOAs don't need to be responsive. They do. Real estate agents, everybody, you know the difference between somebody who's providing good, solid service and somebody that's not. And I just want to say that out loud. I started the search process in November of 2020 because I knew my lease was going to end in February of 2021. Things were continuously delayed so often that I honestly thought I was going to end up homeless trying to buy my own apartment. Isn't it ironic? Yes, it is. It was a very stressful situation for me to go through alone. During the final walkthrough before closing, there were some minor cosmetic items which I flagged during the inspection that were not addressed, but I decided to close anyway because of the looming lease expiration date. I was able to finally close 3 days before my lease expired and moved in 2 days later. Ooh, cool. I was happy that the stress of the purchase was finally behind me, but I honestly think the purchase experience robbed me of the enjoyment of being able to fully prepare for the move. Yes and no, buying your first home is just super stressful in general, but I think that this was maybe overly stressful or he wasn't super informed. I'd be interested to meet the real estate agent and see all the work that they did as well. I thought the worst, and it'd be interesting as well. This, because it's a new build, quite possibly they didn't use a real estate agent. And so then your huge question has to be, like, everybody talks about not needing real estate agents on new builds because they do all the work, but it's nice having somebody in your corner that can explain stuff to you, that can make you either more or less comfortable in a situation to pull you out of it. I think it's always worth having a good real estate agent, specifically on a new build. I thought the worst was behind me, but more problems started to occur shortly thereafter. Less than a month after all the units were sold in the building, the construction development company declared bankruptcy, and the owner fled the country to avoid any fiscal and legal responsibility. This was a huge blow to me and my neighbors, which now had no recourse for potential construction warranty, which we would soon need. Here are some of the issues I have encountered. One, HVAC wasn't properly installed, and there was a constant leak, which ended up causing a hole above my shower. And it also stopped cooling and needed repairs. I spent over 10 weeks without AC during the summer of 2021. That sucks. Two, built-in refrigerator wasn't properly installed and missing magnet covers, which caused it to spoil food and leak water. Ooh. Three, leaks in all apartments, which multiple construction roofing companies haven't been able to solve. The latest repairs actually made the water leak more into my apartment. The reason why I decided to write this post is because there's currently a storm in New York and the water dripping interrupted my sleep. What a bummer. The sewer line got clogged. Four, the sewer line got clogged frequently and the lobby would smell like feces or get flooded with them. We had to set up regular quarterly preventative plumber visits to avoid having to pay exorbitant emergency weekend fees. On top of that, the HOA company set up by the sellers wasn't doing anything. They were not cleaning up, not shoveling snow, not responding to any of our inquiries. Me and all the other owners in my building were quick to remove them and establish a new LLC to serve as the new HOA. After sending legal letters in order to force them to share the financials, we discovered they weren't even paying utilities, taxes, and many other liabilities. This forced us to untangle all that mess and almost double the monthly common charges in order to fix our budget. There's also been multiple assessments for various issues, which at this point has been costly, I am sure. That's the hard thing about HOAs as well, and that's why you should look at the documentation that HOAs provide you on the budget, the assessments, the meetings, and stuff like that. Everybody acts like those things aren't important, but they'll give you a lot of information on the current status of the HOA, and they're well worth looking at when you're buying a house. And in Utah, they're required to send them to you, so just look at them. I'm planning to move to California this year, and I was considering repairing everything and renting the apartment, but at this point, I'm considering selling instead. Being a full time renter means less headaches and volatility. Another downside of buying a condo is that you cannot do things at your own pace, and you depend on all your neighbors to agree in order to perform repairs. With the real estate, everything takes forever. So true. I've been ashamed to share this and with most of the people that I know because I feel like I've been a fool to let myself buy a place that would have so many issues. They just think I'm lucky because I got a good mortgage rate and properties have appreciated a lot in my neighborhood. But to be honest, I would have made much more money in the stock market, even though I'll miss the tax deductions. The experience is also deterring me from looking into real estate investing. They never talk about the crap that can go wrong in bigger pockets. That last point is super true. I think there's huge lessons here just to be aware of. Having a good real estate agent or just somebody who understands HOAs in your corner to explain things to you. And the two with real estate investing, it's a huge thing that everybody wants to act like it's this big old golden goose that's going to make you a lot of money. But nobody realizes the nuance of, like, you should try to be buying a property at discount. The cash flow needs to be functional and there needs to not be a lot of work on top of it. Like, a place could be cash flowing really good, but if you have 3 times as much maintenance as you're expecting, it's just going to disappear super quickly. And so with real estate investing, there's just so many variables that people really should be more aggressive about figuring out and learning. It is a great investment avenue. No, not everybody should do it, period. But this was the story I really wanted to see today because I thought, because it's just heart wrenching. It's absolutely heart wrenching seeing this. All right, on to story number 3. This is another real estate agent story by D. Humphreys 3 years ago. I had a phone call asking about a property. When we went to see it, they made an offer, asked me to list their house, but it wasn't quite ready for good pictures. And before we got in an offer, we got bumped because of the sale contingency. For sure, makes sense. So He's going to list their house, and they were going to make the purchase of the home that they were going to buy contingent on that home selling. And so this is a guy who met a seller and who's helping him buy a house as well. Asked about getting more of the cursory pictures I just taken, just needed to do a few more things. Told me a crazy story about buying this house, how buying this house went. The lender and the realtor were the worst. So the sellers are complaining to this new realtor about their old realtor and lender. Had to bring much more money to closing than had been quoted. The realtor was pushing them to close. All sorts of twists and turns that had nothing to do with the client. Then they wanted to see one of my listings. They went out 3 times, spent hours and hours on the property, wrote it, got their house under contract, went back out to the house, and the client wanted to change the terms of the contract. Basically, they have their home listed. They went and looked at another listing that this real estate agent had, and they submitted an offer, got under contract. So their listing is under contract, and then the purchase of a home is under contract. And once all this happened, they started asking the agent to start renegotiating the terms. We went back to the house. The client wanted to change the terms of the contract and said I would ask. Ask? What do you mean ask? It's super valid points. Almost negotiate terms unless it doesn't change anything for the sellers in any way, or the seller's just trying to be a good sport. But they don't have any reason to do it unless there's like due diligence items and you have the threat of backing out. I explained that we already had an accepted offer and that they were now trying to change it. It went on, and we got stumped on possession. The client and the buyer did not want to move twice, so they were trying to renegotiate again about possession. That was it. My sellers were done. The contract on that house fell apart, but I still had the other transaction, the buying transaction. They fussed at my principal broker, stomped and carried on about how crazy this was, and I did not make the changes they needed on the contract and how they had been wronged at every turn. They closed on the sale, ended up moving into something temporary while they bought another house with a different agent because I was awful. Something when people tell you a crazy story about their last transaction, the crazy is sitting across the table from you. This story is hard to hear for the specific that you don't necessarily know who's being 100% honest here. He could have been being a terrible agent, he or she, or the client could have been terrible. But I can tell you that clients are very difficult sometimes. I had a client who was selling their house and they had a cat shed. And by a cat shed, I mean that they had a shed full of cats in cages that hadn't been neutered and that she just kept in there. There's like 20 cats in cages in there. And I asked her, I was like, yo, hey, why don't you just take this to the Humane Society? And she said, well, I don't want these cats to be killed. I'm saving them. And I was like, well, take them to a no-kill Humane Society, to a no-kill shelter. And she said, well, no, I'm saving them. So, like, that's crazy. Having 20 cats in a shed, the way that you cool them off is by lifting up the flaps on the shed. There's just crazy people out there. I don't know what to tell you. But this is some of the stuff that people can kind of go through as a real estate agent. Good or bad, right or wrong, I don't really know. Also, a huge nuanced piece of it as well. Selling your house and buying another house on paper is very simple, but there's a lot of nuance and complications in it. So it's always just to be aware. Good to have either a really smart person on your side to help you get through the process or having a really good real estate agent are your two solutions there. But let's keep going. The next one is another agent story. So we're doing 2 agent stories in a row. Z-Bad, this was 3 years ago. My mother's best friend. On the surface, it seemed like, he's saying that my mother's best friend was a terrible client. On the surface, it seemed like a dream deal. Budget of twice the average home price, all cash, interior didn't matter at all because she was planning on ripping it up anyway, but dang, was it awful. So basically, she's going to pay for her house all in cash, and she's going to flip it and make it into her dream home, is what it sounds like. She was moving 15 minutes across the state border, and she insisted I do it. I kept saying I should refer it out, but she said no, and my mother would kill me if I refused not to represent her. So I had to go through this 6-week-long process of getting licensed in the new state. They probably should have referred it out, unless the property's worth like $2 million or something. It's typically just not worth it, unless it's part of your strategy as well. I'm licensed in Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming, but I service those 3 states. Makes sense I can go to Evanston, Wyoming, Preston, Idaho, and I could service all of northern Utah or anywhere in Utah. But it's part of my plan. So if it's not part of your plan, it's just not worth doing it. But she would dodge me for weeks. I'd call and text her 2 to 3 times a week for 3 weeks with no answer. And then when I'd give up, she'd call my mom complaining that I'm ignoring her now. Yeah, that's a hard one. So my mom would call and yell at me. Then the process would start all over again. She would show up to the showings almost falling over drunk and then complain to my mom I was too touchy. I was literally helping her up the stairs. I've had clients come to showings drunk. It's hard to handle. I don't know what the right way to handle it is. I was always much closer to her ex-husband, and he called me one time while she was in the car. I didn't answer, but she saw his name and lost it. She also kept changing what she wanted by wide margins. That's a bad sign. She wanted to live in the city, so we'd see 10 urban homes. Then she'd say she needed more land, so we'd see 10 suburban homes. Then she'd say she wanted to be close to the water, and so on. When clients are flip flopping that much, it typically leads to them not buying a house. Because buying a house is a very stressful process, and if you don't know what you want or have your why on what you want it and you're flip flopping, you're going to give up because it's not a super easy process. When on around house 30, we finally got an offer accepted. She dropped the bomb on me that she was actually wanted to get a mortgage. I told her since she didn't have a job, it was going to be much bigger hassle and that she had such a giant bank account inheritance that she shouldn't even deal with it. The entire purchase price wasn't even 10% of what she had liquid. She shouldn't have commented that her value or her values and what she wants could be different than what the agent wants, and him judging her or her intentions on the amount of money that she has, it just creates a bad blood between people because you're trying to interpret their life, good or bad, right or wrong. I don't know. It's just good to be aware as an agent. You can't judge people or try to interpret their actions too much. And what she had liquid and 5% of her total net worth, but she insisted. So I called up a lender to find out what she could use her other assets and qualify and maybe get a non-conforming loan. Yep. Well, the conversation didn't get much further than that because she refused to let him see any of her assets. No bank statements, no nothing, because it was none of his business. That's a valid point. If you're wanting to get a mortgage, they're going to look at your financials. They're going to look at a lot of your financials. They're going to ask you a lot of questions. There's nothing to do about that. So after all of that, she decided to rent. That's where you expect it to go. Typically, people who don't know or who aren't explaining things effectively, because they don't really want to buy a house, or they're creating reasons not to buy a house, which is totally fine. You don't have to buy a house, but people don't know how to emotionally communicate to themselves or have the emotional intelligence to say, "I obviously don't want to do this." And so, just as an agent, I see it all the time. But that's a good one. So now, okay, now we're going on to client number 2. I went through at least 50 properties and fell out of escrow 3 times due to the various issues that went undisclosed until literally the final seconds before I signed off contingency over the course of a year looking for my home. I spent about $2,000 in unusable home inspections because the selling agent would always try to float something just under the radar. Y Green and Hero loans are curse words on my house. I don't know what those are. But I finally found a piece to call mine and love it. Hang in there, you'll find something. I do like this piece of advice. Buying a home is very complicated, it's very stressful, and it's worth spending a bunch of money on inspections. We spent $1,200 on this inspection for this house, and the last inspections was $130 for a sewer scope. And my wife didn't want to get it, and I'm happy that we did because it told us that there's a belly in our sewer lateral. We negotiated that and decreased the price by another $4,000. So even if it doesn't, it's either going to do 2 things. It's going to tell you that nothing's wrong, which is helpful, or it's going to tell you something's wrong, and then you can either renegotiate it or at least you're aware of it. So always, one, process is hard. You just got to get through it. And if you really want a house, it's going to be worth it. As long as you do correct due diligence, you're comfortable with the mortgage payment, all of that stuff. But last story. This is a client. Tide Pod Racer 5 years ago. I got lucky and never had a bad experience from a realtor. I hired a realtor off this website, and I could tell he was actually a wholesome guy once I actually met him. We went and viewed a few houses, and while we were in them, he noticed some clear red flags and was just like, nope, I refuse to put you in this house. Water damage, mold, rodents, etc. We kept going through, and after several houses, I found one I loved. I found one I loved. Then we kept looking around at more. He didn't push the house that I loved. He was just willing to go along for the ride to see what else there was. This is you should go look at a bunch of houses, and just because you fall in love with the first one, if you're trying to submit an offer quickly, go look at a bunch of houses the next day. But it's worth just seeing a bunch of houses and getting a good idea of what the market looks like. After 5 or 7 showings, you're going to have a lot better idea than after one showing. I eventually went back and bought the house that I loved And now that I'm moved in, my realtor and I talk regularly, and we actually hang out and have a few beers from time to time at the new house. 100%, I get beers with my clients as well, but you have to be careful. You have to always be willing to explain to them what your perspective on the real estate market is, and then also your perspective on the value of their home, and not be trying to make it so that they're comfortable or happy or want you to be your friend. Your job is to inform them effectively on the real estate market. And if your friendship makes that harder to do, it's just something to be aware of. But I get beers with my clients all the time, so I'm not complaining about it. But that's all that I got for you today. So, just real quick, if you have any real estate horror stories, submit them in. padenfairbanks@gmail.com. Send them in. We really need them. Or comment them down below. Also, subscribers and likes, we just super appreciate it. And if you're looking to buy or sell a house in Utah, that's the whole biggest reason that we're doing all this. And also because I want to be a YouTuber. But other than that, thanks for watching. I hope you're having a great day. And bye-bye now.